All right, welcome back to the Sanibel Online Writers Conference. We have a couple of agents here. I'm going to introduce them very quickly. They're going to speak for around 15 minutes or so, and then they're going to take questions from you guys. So Julia Livshin was an intern and then an editor at The Atlantic. She's been representing writers at her own literary agency since 2017. And then a pillar of our Sanibel Island Writers Conference community, Christopher Schelling, spent 13 years at a literary agency before starting his own Selectric Artists agency in 2011. And now I am going to slide out of your screen because they're going to address the question that I know many of you guys have, which is, what do agents want? Take it away, guys.
Thanks, Jason. So just, I guess, first, we'll get into some of the nuts and bolts of what an agent does, I think. But Julia, do you want to just give a little bit more of a full intro, sort of what led you to publishing and kind of, what your list is made up of now?
Sure. So I haven't been agenting for nearly as long as you, Christopher, but I've been around publishing for a long time. Like Jason said, I started out at The Atlantic as an editor there, and they used to have a robust short fiction department. So I worked a lot with the short stories and worked with all sorts of writers, from John Updike to Roxana Robinson to Garrison Keillor, who once left a message on my voicemail that I kept on replaying over and over again. But as an agent, I love being on the front lines. I love being on the receiving end of all this new writing that's getting done and that you guys are sending in. And I look at every submission that comes in. I don't necessarily read it in its entirety, but I will read some of every manuscript and the query letter. And I really try to not take for granted that I'm being entrusted with people's intimate kind of creative output. And I think that's a really big deal and a big responsibility. So I really appreciate that. In terms of my list, most of my clients right now are fiction writers, though I'm also interested in memoir and narrative nonfiction. And in terms of fiction, my tastes are pretty eclectic. I don't focus on a particular genre. I'm just looking for good writing. And most of it currently skews literary, but within that category, I have historical fiction, literary mysteries, children's books, voicey coming-of-age stories, and then also more experimental, stylistically innovative stuff. I would say I don't look at much sci-fi fantasy, but other than that, I'm open to anything. How about you, Christopher?
That is a really great mix. I mean, that's one of the things I love too about being an agent, is that you can sort of take on anything that interests you. And there's not, I have strengths in certain categories, but just being able to sort of make a decision like, oh, this thing is interesting. It doesn't, it doesn't even have like a defined genre. It's like being the champion of things, like you said, right out the gate.
Yeah.
I had a fairly typical, path into agenting. Right out of college, I started working as an editorial assistant at a publisher. So I did that for a while, and moving over to being an agent made sense because I found a lot of what I didn't like about the corporate side of publishing was that there were too many things where it was like, okay, well, we have to do this, but don't tell the author. Or, I mean, within any creative process, there's going to be stuff that goes on that the creator should not know about. They don't want to see how the sausage gets made necessarily. But I did sort of feel like, no, I want to be on the side of telling the author things, going back and arguing on their behalf. It sort of felt like I would be, yes, working just a little bit more from the other side. And that's definitely what it's been. I then moved to a boutique agency. There were 4 agents and 2 assistants for a while, and then in 2011 started my own agency, which I think has made the most sense of anything in my publishing journey.
You've been doing it for so long. Do you remember your first sale?
I do. You know what? My first sale, I also learned a lesson with. It was an editor I had worked with called me and said, "Oh, I have this project I want to buy, and the authors don't have an agent. So will you take it on?" And it was something that I didn't have any affinity for. And there were two authors, and one of them really rubbed me the wrong way. But I thought, I'm just starting out, and this is like a guaranteed sale. And of course, that editor ended up not being able to buy the book. So I was like, oh, and now I'm the agent. I have to send this out. So I did end up selling the book, but it was a weirdly unhappy experience. And I learned, don't ever do it just because you think that there's a sale.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like easy money. It's like, that is not enough. You have to have the passion for what this is.
Yeah, that's what I'm finding too, that you have to, well, I recently had a conversation with a book to film agent, and their job is to sell books to Hollywood. And she told me that she buys two kinds of projects: stuff she knows how to sell and stuff that she loves. And so that, I guess those two buckets, you got to fill one of those buckets for an agent to bite.
Yep. And what you hope is that you hit them both.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit, I guess, about that, sort of what exactly a literary agent's job is. I mean, it's sort of at its most basic, you are the author's representative. So you go in and you sell their book. And I think a major chunk of it is the fiduciary responsibility. You're making money for them. You're distributing the money to them. Sometimes it is their entire living. Sometimes it's, just a side hustle. But you are still, I mean, this is an author's living. And the piece that goes along with that is that we make our livings as a percentage of theirs. So essentially, we work for the authors. We are the author's employees. They do need us for our expertise and our contacts and our, sort of all the knowledge that we have, but we're working for free until we sell that project of theirs, and then we take 15% of it. So there's a lot that's sort of bound up in the, sort of the creative and money process. I feel like a good agent makes a great sale, right? First of all, takes on the project because they connect with it and connect with the author. I like to do a little bit of editorial work with a writer, partly because almost everything needs it, and partly because it's good to see how writers work. So that then when I'm pitching them to an editor, I can say, oh, she's great with revisions. And then from there, you need the agent to have a sort of a wide variety of contact of editors at different publishing houses that they can send the writer's work to. And then what you hope is all of them love it and they all bid against one another and you all make $1 million and it's a huge bestseller. Mm-hmm. So the sale and the contract and that sort of initial chunk of it is very, very important, but a good agent really stays with it through the entire process. Sort of, knowing exactly what is going on with, what revisions the editor is asking the writer for, or if there's a cover that is upsetting to the writer that the writer doesn't want on their book. They need a middleman. They need somebody to go in there and say, hey, look, that's ugly. You can't do that. We have to figure this out. So really being there to fight for the author every step of the way. If there's sort of not enough being done marketing wise, if there's a lot of times, if there's bad news to deliver, it's the agent, again, the go-between who has to do that. And that makes sense. You want the publisher-writer relationship to remain a little bit pure in that way, that they don't have to have the hardest conversations. That is part of the therapy that we provide.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And in terms of time frame, if you're curious how long, once I have an agent, how long does it take to actually get my book out into bookstores? I think the sale, it's all Christopher can chime in, but it's so variable. I mean, sometimes you can sell something so quickly. Sometimes it takes more than a year. And then from the point of sale, after you have a contract, it can take anywhere from 18 to 24 months to get the book out. So it's a long road it's a long relationship that you're going to have with an agent. So it's super important that you make the right connection there for the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like that's the like-mindedness. It is. You're going to be in each other's lives. There's, a lot of times I refer to the finding the right editor for a writer to be a matchmaking process. It's the same with writers finding the right agent.
Mm-hmm.
There, with the submissions that I get, when I turn things down, I'm turning them down because they're not right for me. I'm not saying this is not publishable, nobody will want that. I'm just saying that I didn't have that special connection with the work that I need to be able to go in and sort of be 1,000% behind it, and having it feel genuine, that the editor knows, oh, this is something that he's really excited about, and here are all these reasons why.
Absolutely. And one thing that writers who are submitting to agents should keep in mind is that you need to get comfortable with the rejections, because there's going to be a lot of them, and they're not at all personal. As Christopher was saying, it's such a subjective process, and because there's so much work involved on the part of the agent to sell a manuscript, there really has to be that kind of gut, almost like a falling in love type of thing, as cheesy as that sounds. And it's hard to find that person who feels that way about your manuscript. And if somebody doesn't feel that way and they take it on anyway because they think, oh, I think I know an editor who'll want it, they're not really doing you a favor, because they're not really going to be its most passionate advocate. So you just kind of gotta stick with it and develop a thick skin.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guarantee you that every project I have ever sold, going back to when they were doing them with stone tablets and chisels, there is never anything that I've sent out, even the #1 New York Times best-selling writers, there's never been anything where every single editor I sent it to wants it, loves it, and bids on it. There's always somebody who rejects it. There's a lot of times, a lot of people reject things. And then the ones who get it, who connect with it in the way that I do, I mean, then sort of the door is open. It can go anywhere. But there are editors I know who kick themselves, who say, they see something goes on to become a success and they had a shot at it, and they'll say like, oh God, I should have gone for that. And it's like, no, because you wouldn't have supported it in that way. And the book itself is great and it would have found its audience, but it wouldn't have had the corporate push that is, really the thing that gets it right out the door. So it's one of those, things happen for a reason, but there's always rejection. I must say, editors are also very polite about their rejections. Some of them write really, really good reject letters where they'll praise all the right things, say what didn't work for them, or if it's something else on their list that's too similar. Sometimes they're so nice that the writer sort of looks at it and says, okay, now why did they turn it down again? It's like, but I think it's a sign of respect that they sort of, if they really read something and it was a near miss, they want the writer to know, a real human being read this and absorbed it and enjoyed it.
Yeah, and then that's sort of an invitation to come back to them with a subsequent manuscript. And editors will often say, like, I love the voice, I loved all this stuff about it, but for whatever reason it doesn't work, but I would really like to see so-and-so's next book. And that's huge, I think.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. So, I guess you already sort of answered the things you're not looking for.
Yes. So I think, the hardcore genre stuff, like crime thrillers, fantasy sci-fi, although I honestly feel like I don't even want to close the door on that. Like I'll look at anything, really.
Right. Though I find that sometimes the best approaches I get from writers are when they've familiarized themselves with my list. They know the other writers that I have and think, oh, I would fit well into that. It's like, this is the range of things that he does, and I can see myself in there. Now, sometimes that's like the perfect way to find an agent. Sometimes it's like, oh, I do something just like that other writer, I'll go to them. Sometimes then the agent says, well, I already have that person.
Yeah.
So I don't really have room for it. But yeah, let's briefly touch on the querying process before we go to questions. What do you like to see in a query?
So I ask for, and again, I mostly work with fiction, so you'll have different things that you look for in terms of nonfiction proposals, but I ask for the first 50 pages of a manuscript, although the manuscript should be complete. Don't query an agent with a half-written book. Again, fiction. I'd like to see the first 50 pages. Some agents, you need to do your research before you start submitting, because agent guidelines in terms of what they want vary pretty widely. Some agents want to see 10 pages. Some agents, I think Christopher likes to see the whole manuscript, but it pays to give them what they're asking for. So I like to see the first 50 pages of the manuscript, and then the query letter should be a brief synopsis and a bio. But the synopsis should not be a blow by blow of everything that happens in the book. And I have gotten query letters like this. I get pages of synopsis mentioning every character and how they're significant. Nobody wants to read that. You don't need to analyze it for me. You don't need to explain why it's similar to Hemingway. You don't need to tell me that your cousin who used to be an editor at Random House thinks it has great commercial potential. You just want basically a paragraph telling me what it's about. And for the bio, you want to mention any literary publications, if you have an MFA, anything that's sort of relevant to the writing life. But if you don't have those, that's okay too. Just talk a little bit about what you do, where you live. You can add a little bit of personality, but you don't want to go overboard. I feel like with query letters, the main goal is to get the agent to turn the page and read the manuscript, which should speak for itself. If the query letter has a lot of typos, if it misspells my name or calls me by somebody else's name because you forgot to copy and paste when you submitted it to another agent, if any of those things, I won't necessarily hit delete, but it kind of makes a bad first impression. And agents have so many submissions to look at that if something really turns them off in the query letter, they'll just go to the next one. And the mantra here is do no harm. You want your query letter to be professional and concise, but it's not meant to be like a creative activity in and of itself, I don't think. What do you think, Christopher?
Right. I agree. I like a brief query letter, especially light on synopsis. I glaze over after about the third sentence. I understand what you mean about saying, like, don't tell me how it compares to Hemingway. The one thing that's become way more prevalent in publishing now is comp titles.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's the thing. Publishers don't want to hear about Hemingway either. What they want are books from, like, probably the last 2 or 3 years that have been successful that are similar. Now, I don't feel like an author has to have that figured out by the time they're writing their query letter. That's actually something that's the publisher's job, to kind of figure out how to work it into the market. It's good at a certain point. I like to do a bit of it as, to make the editor's job easier.
Mm-hmm.
So I think sometimes it also shows that the author knows the current market, that they're out there reading, and it's, they can say it's like, it's somewhere between these two things. So that a couple comp titles will help. With fiction, I guess I ask for the full manuscript, because now, I mean, just the size of the file sending doesn't really matter. It also seems a lot of times getting started is the hardest part for novelists. And I mean, you're right. We get so many submissions that really mostly then if those first, 50 pages aren't working, that an editor isn't going to get past that point. You're not going to probably be able to sell that thing just sort of based on your reaction. So, you move on to the next thing. But if there's something that kind of intrigues me about it, and I'm thinking, oh, there's a little too much telling and not enough showing, where does it go? And then I can flip through. So, I mean, again, it's agent preference, and really do check the websites, whatever I think there's some, pretty good submission sites and things.
And sorry to jump in, but another kind of trick, or I don't know if it's a trick, but the acknowledgments pages of books that you admire, and that seems similar in either subject matter or style or spirit to whatever you're working on. If there are acknowledgments pages, you can bet that the agent and editor are thanked in there. And that is a good way to kind of triangulate and to figure out that maybe this agent is possibly a good match. Not because I've written something that's exactly like this book, but just kind of in the same sort of vibe way.
Right.
And then also, I was just going to say, Publishers Marketplace, which is an industry publication that you can subscribe to on a monthly basis, and lets you search out recent deals. And also you can search by, say, historical fiction, or you can search for deal makers. So if you came across an agent and maybe you think they'd be right for you, you can also pull up their, recent deals in the last year or so and see what else they're into.
Yeah, exactly. Those are, I think, two of the really good ways to do it. Also, just searching, like putting an author's name in quotes and then put literary agent in quotes, and you can usually find the info you need.
Yes.
All right. So I guess it's probably time we start taking some questions. Yeah. I think they're going to throw them up on the screen for us.
When they do but while we're waiting, another thing I was going to mention is that simultaneous submissions are totally fine and expected. So you don't have to wait for an agent to get back to you before submitting to another agent. But the courteous thing to do is, if you have an interest in if you think you found an agent who's given you an offer, you do want to reach out to the other agents you've sent it to let them know, so that they don't spend time reading your manuscript if it's no longer available.
That is a great point. Yes.
So here's a question from Delaney. what are some things that you see with new authors when they're pitching you a book that they forget constantly or misunderstand? What do you think, Christopher?
I think it's not even necessarily first-time authors. I think it's the ones who haven't really researched. That if there's, I do a lot of young adult, but I don't really do a ton of middle grade or picture book. And somebody sending me picture book, it's like, oh, okay. So the people who haven't really done the research, and you sort of think, oh, they're just going through a list of every single literary agent there is. And I just happen to be on that list. They didn't really target this. I think that's usually the thing. It's sort of, I think the misunderstanding that it's just any agent will do any project.
Yeah, that's a good observation. Other than that, new author pitching.
Oh, here we go. Involve yourselves with authors going the self-publishing route in any way? If so, how do your roles differ in relation to the traditional publishing route? I'll very briefly say that if you have self-published, it's a very difficult step to get that book traditionally published. I don't know if that's what if you're asking, if there's a book that I took on and did not sell, if the author then wants to self-publish, I don't really get that involved in that part of the process. But if you have self-published, the only thing that's going to attract a major publisher to that is massive sales. Something that sort of happens where they can say like, oh, wow, that person was able to sell 10,000 copies on their own. We can really ride that wave. If it's sort of, it's sold respectably, even 1,000 copies. I think the publishers understand, it's like, that was your first wave. That was everybody that you knew. That was as much publicity as you could get. That was the reach. So I think that one is a very hard goal to reach.
That's my sense too, that it's one thing if you've self-published a book and then you have another one that you'd like to sell that isn't out there yet. I mean, I've gotten involved in that sort of thing. But if you're trying to sell a book that's already been sitting on Amazon for a year, that would be a hard thing to sell. Alexandra, I'm interested in being a part of publishing books, possibly marketing them. How did you get into being an agent? I said a little bit, I started in magazines, did a fair amount of freelance editorial work for publishers. And I think the natural way to do it is to apprentice yourself to an agent at an established agency, to work as a junior agent, or maybe you would get a job in subsidiary rights. Christopher, you would know more about this because you've come from a bigger agency before. But so I think that's the typical track.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of times it's people who have had some experience working within a publisher, who then sort of see what the work is there, and then also see what an agent does and want to make that switch. I do feel like it's valuable experience, just being able to see, knowing what goes into a marketing meeting, what happens during the editorial process, seeing it and having, colleagues who, just sort of hearing what goes on. Then, with the way that I got into being an agent was because I'd been an editor. I did business with a lot of agents, and there was one who I did a lot of business with. And at a certain point it was like, well, we should work together, not sort of on, the opposing sides. So while I don't recommend working for the corporate publishers in general, I do think there was valuable experience there. I think Julia's probably right. Going to a bigger agency, being, coming in as an assistant or doing, some internship, apprentice work. I think that's the way to see. Certainly in the before times, then the assistant could sit in on meetings and things and just learn how things happen, just watch how things happen. Because there isn't really a lot, there isn't a lot out there about how to be an agent. You sort of have to learn it, not necessarily learn it as you go, but learn it from someone else. It's sort of, knowledge that's handed down in a way. I do feel like there are more and more agents these days, and I think a lot of them have not come from that route. I think a lot of them are just sort of, I'm going to hang out my shingle and I'm going to sell books. And I can't say I love that, but it's also, I have evidence that is also being done. So. Okay, Brent, as someone who's never been published but would like to be, should I begin with short stories before trying to pitch longer works to editors? It's a fiction question there. Why don't you go for it, Julia?
I don't think that's necessary. First of all, those two things could happen simultaneously. You could write short stories and send them out on your own. As an agent, agents occasionally send out short stories, but sort of from the financial end of things, agents mostly get involved with bigger projects. Would you say that's true, Christopher?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't. But if you have a novel in you that you're working on, you don't need to go the short story route first. I would say there's no reason to.
Right. I feel like with nonfiction, it's very important that you have a platform. That is, something that I'm only going to touch on right here. So I could talk about that forever. But sort of the built-in audience and marketing platform that you have. With fiction, you don't need that. A debut novel can be from someone who's never published anything anywhere before and no one has ever heard of. If you also have short story publishing credits and your agent can say, oh, here's a first novel, and they've also had stories in such and such, it's nice. That of course, as we've said before, that means you've been through the process, that probably you understand the rejection process. That if there are 2 stories that were published, you probably didn't send out 2 submissions. You probably sent out tons and you got 2 accepted. So it sort of signals, okay, this is a working writer, but it is absolutely not a necessary thing. And I agree with Julia. It's something that can be done simultaneously.
Kip, is there anything an aspiring editor should know when it comes to communication with agents? Christopher, you've been on both ends of this.
Yeah, the things that I like about, the editors I like the most are the ways in which they can be on sort of off the record conversations. That there are a lot of things where their hands are tied. It's sort of, it's, 5 big, now probably 4 big corporations that are sort of running everything. And I need a person on the inside who's going to say, okay, look, here's what's actually happening. Here's what I think we're going to be able to do. I don't know if this can happen. Rather than sort of the like, oh yeah, that's coming up at the meeting, next week and blah, blah, blah. It's like, be honest with me. Once again, we're talking about someone's career here. It's our business and we have lots of these things and but I need that connection. I feel like that's the one thing, the editor who's going to be a real human being with me.
And something folks may not realize, but even if an editor loves your book that your agent submitted to them, and is 100% behind it, it's not a done deal. Like that editor has to sell it in-house. They have to sell it to their marketing folks. They have to be its advocate at the publisher, and a lot of things can derail that. So having an editor's kind of enthusiastic response is not enough necessarily. So that sort of back and forth that Christopher was talking about between the editor and the agent is really kind of it's a valuable relationship to have. When you can kind of read between the lines about what's kind of happening behind the scenes.
Tara, Christopher sent me a wonderful rejection letter years ago. I reread it whenever I'm having a bad day. Oh, thank you.
That's so nice.
So I try really hard to respond. I mean, the volume of them is just ridiculous, and that's not a brag. It's not. It's just it's a reality. And I say on my website, I hate it, but a lot of them, it's like, if you don't hear from me, that means no. I just didn't. I don't send form letters back, but I'm not able to get back to everyone. It's just there's simply no time. So when something hits me in a certain way, when it's one of those near misses, like I said, like we like getting from editors, I like to try to reach out with that. So thank you for letting me know. That's I'm really flattered.
Like Matthias, I hope I'm not mispronouncing. How long does it usually take to respond to a submission? I would say if you don't, again, it varies, but if you hear nothing between 6 or 8 weeks, it's probably a no. What would you agree, Christopher?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I feel like maybe 3 months if sort of I'm falling behind. But yeah, that does now. And that's, I think, for us as the gatekeepers there. With editors, it varies, like you were saying earlier, it varies from 1 night to 2 years. I mean, sometimes, not necessarily that you send something to an editor and 2 years later you do the deal with them. But like I had mentioned, there are more and more agents all the time. I think editors get more and more submissions. And I think the response times from editors used to be much, much faster than it is now. I've noticed a real slowing down, and I mean, part of it is, pivoting for the pandemic, and I think they were already behind, and that got behind, and now it's just. But I definitely feel like the response time from editors has lengthened to several months, whereas it really used to feel like you could sort of collect most of the responses within certainly the first weeks or month, really.
I'm as an agent, I'm constantly circling back to people politely, kind of nudging in case something kind of got slipped through the cracks or got shuffled to the bottom of the pile, and they're usually grateful for that, but I think they're just, like Christopher was saying, I think they're inundated with manuscripts, and I think a lot of the reading actually has to happen at home on the weekends, because what their job during the day is not about sitting around reading manuscripts. It's all these other facets of being an editor. So you really have to sit tight and kind of play the long game and be comfortable waiting it out.
Madelyn, how much of an impact does having an MFA in creative writing or related fields have on a writer's prospects of getting published? The degree itself, I would say, I mean, minimal. It's all about the work. I mean, I have MFA clients who write beautifully. I have clients who did not finish middle school who also write beautifully. So again, it says something about your dedication to the craft, perhaps, that you went and got the degree. But I don't feel, when someone writes to me and says I'm a graduate of Iowa, it's like, oh, okay, I'll take it seriously, but not, I'm taking it much, much, much more seriously than anyone else, even in a literary way.
I agree. I agree with that. But that credential in a query letter to an agent or to an editor will get the manuscript looked at. Wouldn't you say? It would, like it. I mean, it suggests a degree of seriousness. It doesn't guarantee that the product is going to be is going to be a certain caliber, but it does it's a credential. So it does certainly, if you have an MFA in creative writing or a related field, you should definitely mention it.
Oh yeah, I mean, never a bad thing to have education, for sure. Yes, I didn't mean to sound as down on it as I'm sure I did.
Michelle, do you need a platform for memoir writing?
That's
What do
an
you think?
interesting one. Less than most other kinds of nonfiction, because you are sort of the expert in your own life. Now, it does help if you've had some things published on the topic, either they're personal essays or you're sort of known for things on, whatever the piece of your life is that you're writing about. And it also really does help just in the marketing of it to sort of know, this is, and with nonfiction, a lot of times that's the way the writer will have a long form book, but there will be journalism or essays or things elsewhere. So it's imperative with some kinds of nonfiction. With memoir, it's also different. With a lot of nonfiction, it's sold to publishers on a proposal and sample chapters. Memoirs are sort of an exception to that. They really like to see a full manuscript because it needs an arc. It needs a beginning, middle, and end, like a novel does. It needs to be satisfying in that way. So they treat it a little bit like each one of those categories. So I would say a platform is always great. It is not as utterly necessary as it is for more practical nonfiction. Callie, in terms of book length, is there a magic word count?
I don't think so. I don't know. I guess for a novel, 60 to 80,000 words, I would say. Something that's a trilogy, for example, that might be tricky. I mean, if you're sending something super, super long, although I would read the beginning of it as I would read anything else, but you'd really do want to send your most polished, edited down product when you're sending things out, because something that's super long is going to be a harder sell, I think.
I agree. I mean, I think once you hit 100,000 words and over, you need to be earning it. It needs to be that long. And there's a certain amount of science fiction and fantasy and fantasy in particular, with all the world building and all, huge casts and multiple plot strands and things. Those, I think, readers almost demand that they belong. They want a world that they can fall into. So that one is sort of an exciting, like if you say to an editor, oh yeah, this is 130,000 words. If you're just trying to pitch a commercial novel to them, that sounds horrifying. But if it's an epic fantasy, that's sort of right there in the pocket. I will say I have a really great literary novel right now that is about 150,000 words, and that is making it difficult. There are editors who will say, I don't want to read anything that long. And I think, oh, wow. You shouldn't say that. That's there are some who love a doorstop, that sort of big, important novel. But once again, it really has to earn it. If it's going to be that long, it has to be riveting all the way throughout.
I'm going to jump in with a question. Do you feel, Christopher, that editors are less willing to edit something down, to do like the heavy duty cutting, developmental editing? Are they less willing to do that than they used to? Do things need to be more polished these days?
I do. I feel like because they see so many more things that, I think that then sometimes, gets, truncated to, oh, editors don't edit anymore. And that's definitely not true. I mean, all of the editors that I work with really do. But do they have time to pull something apart and put it together in a different order? No, probably not. So that's yet another reason to, I think, do a little bit of work with a writer before something goes out on submission, so that an editor doesn't look at something and say, oh, there's this one chunk of it that I don't love. And knowing that they could fix it, but there's probably something coming up, that, the next thing that they see that they don't have to fix.
Right.
Okay, I think, did that say, is this the last question?
I think one or two more, they said.
Okay. Kathy, creative nonfiction like Devil in the White City, pitched to fiction or nonfiction agent? What do you think?
Most agents, I think, would look at both. And something that's like Devil in the White City also, it reads like a novel. So I would, both, either. I mean, it's, yeah. What do you think, Christopher?
I absolutely agree. I mean, if there's some, you say you have largely fiction, but there's also nonfiction that
Yeah.
you do, what interests you. So that makes it, if there are agents who are exclusively fiction, even though this does kind of, move in that direction a little bit, I would definitely, if it's between people who do all one thing or all the other, I would definitely say go with a nonfiction agent for that. But for the most part, most agents do a pretty wide range of things. So that, then at the point that I'm ready to pitch that to editors, I go to nonfiction editors with a project like that. But once again, a lot of editors do both fiction and nonfiction, but it seems to me that sort of the cleaner, easier way to do it is to go where that first bookstore category is going to be.
I think we're done.
We are. Well, this has been great. And Julia, it was great to meet you. Maybe they think that we're best of friends, that agents hang out all the time. but we just met, and it's really great to hear your perspective on things.
Likewise. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. This went so quickly. It was so fun.
Yeah, fantastic questions and stuff. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Take care.